In a previous video, I discussed the best fermenters of 2025, at least the ones that I had access to. In this video, which is part 2 if you like, of that series, Steve Gower, the hop father from Hoppy Jays, joins us to discuss pressure fermentation and also why you might want to upgrade to a Unitank. Stay tuned.
G'day guys, Steve from Hoppy Days here. I'm down at the big brew day, which is an international brew day across the world with the Babs Homebrew Club here in Brisbane. Today I've just brought a few things along on pretty much basic getting into home brewing. In Australia, this is what we'd use for our 23 litre batch, so 30 litre fermenter. And so on, because we're making a 23 litre batch, when we add yeast in for active fermentation, that creates a bit of activity. So we've got a little bit of headspace there. Then we've got an airlock in here, which we can see. Don't always have to see activity in there, bubbling or foaming or even exploding out on the top, depending on what sort of yeast you're using. So this is your entry-level kit. You can make any sort of fermentation. When you make cider, ginger beer, a lot of winemakers like to use glass. That's their thing. But pretty much you can ferment kimchi in here if you really want it. No right or wrong answer. Living in Queensland, obviously temperature fluctuates a fair bit. I think last night I got down to 14 and back up to 24 today. So we talk about fermentation. But we're using specific yeast to make a style of beer under temperate conditions. So say for a lager, we're generally fermenting at 10 to 12 degrees. So lager, the word lager means cool fermentation and storage, long time. Being a bottom fermenting yeast, it sits down the bottom. So you won't see as much activity as you would with an ale. A on the alphabet, top, L is a bit lower, down the bottom. So what we recommend, one of the most important things about brewing is fermentation. So we use what we call a chamber, an old fridge or freezer, put your fermenter in there, and then we're using something like this here, which is what we call a thermostat. That thermostat, you see it in there, controls the temperature of what your fermentation wants to be. So I'll set that to say 18 degrees, Simon. When it's at the right temperature, I'll add my yeast into the fermenter. Once that's in there, don't touch your fermenter, let it go. Another big component is sanitation. We've got a tonic here from Keg King down in Melbourne. No rinse sanitizer, so we're diluting this 1.5 mils per litre. And this has to touch the entire inside of your fermenter. Then you tip it out, and then you're ready to brew. Tasteless, odourless, so it's not going to give you any flavours down the track or aromas that you don't want. So those two things, extremely important. Then what else is it? We're looking at process. It's making a recipe, whether it be from an extract can to a fresh work kit to making your own all-grain mash. And that's like baking cake. It's a recipe. You're following a recipe to make that style of beer or ginger beer or cider or whatever it be to what you like. Then we have our hydrometer. So this is the only way to work out the alcohol content of your beer. So the sugars from your wort, your base wort, and the yeast turn into alcohol. So that's the same in any fermentation, whether it be grapes or rice or whatever. We get what we call starting gravity, was when you start, before you start fermenting and add your yeast in, you're checking your gravity. Then after the period, which can be anywhere from 5 to 21 days or longer for a lager, once that gravity is stable, over 2 or 3 days, it hasn't changed, then you're ready to package. Whether it be in bottles, a lot of guys start off with the plastic ones with bottles, and then we're working up to kegs, which we'll get to a little bit later on. So that's the only way to tell. Other than that, you're just winging it. And that's why we get things like exploding bottles, because people are packaging too early before the fermentation is completed, and there's obviously build up in the bottles. Kegging, on the other hand, is what we call a corny keg, 19 litres. So we're making a 23 litre batch generally. We've got some losses in there with yeast or trub or proteins, and we want to get 19 litres of fresh beer in a keg. This is where something like the Apollo from Keg King comes in really, really handy. Sort of only hit the market a couple of years ago, these PET fermenters. They do have a shelf life on it of a few years, but they hold pressure, so they're pressure tolerant. Once again, I've got my temp controller hooked up to that. This probe is down the middle. This is what reads the temperature. So that there in the middle is reading as close to what's happening inside there as possible. If I'm setting it to 18 degrees, for instance, that's what we want that liquid in there being. In the plastic one, you would attach it to the side, but there might be a 1 to 2 degree variation with what's happening in there and the active fermentation. So that could create, your yeast activity in there could create 2 or 3 degrees warmer than what you think it is on the outside. That's why temperature control is very important, because you can ruin a beer by stressing the yeast, which we don't like to do. Everyone wants good quality beer. This also has what we call a spunding valve. So obviously there's nothing in here showing 0. It goes up to 30. Obviously these tanks have a pressure limit that you don't want to exceed, otherwise you're going to blow it up, and that would not be a nice mess to clean up. So that's why this is important, keeping an eye on it. You also have a pressure relief valve, so if that does happen, you can bleed out the CO2 there. This is your pressure gauge. So during fermentation, that fermentation will produce CO2. That will give you pressure. Generally, we run about sort of 8 to 10 psi in layman's terms, kPa if you want to speak in English terms, but psi on this, and that's obviously going to give you a quicker fermentation. There's no way of any oxygen getting into this fermenter, which can give you off notes in a beer as well. And I'm kegging, so I can transfer straight out of this under pressure straight into my keg, which has been cleaned and sanitized. All that CO2 has been pushed out of here. There's a blanket of CO2 in there, and you're going to get the freshest beer possible. So a little setup like this for $130 for the fermenter is sort of game changing. It fits nicely in a fridge. You can run glycol on it. I've got a coil down the middle there. So if I've got a glycol chiller, I've got a jacket I can put around it. I can have it on the shelf running glycol through it to keep it at the same temperature as I would a temp controller. So lots of different ways of doing it. But for the price, these are great. They are a little bit harder to clean than the plastic ones, I find, because you've got to get your arm down in there. We do a lot of ginger beer in this, so it does hold a bit of colour that I don't want there, but I can see what's going on in there. The yeast is there. There's active krausen on top. I can see there's pressure there. It's fermenting. So for the price, these are great, fresh, quality, awesome beer. We're going to walk over and have a look at what we call Unitank next. Step up for this in the stainless version. So let's go for a walk, Simon. Okay, Simon, here we're stepping up to the creme de la creme of what we call home brewing equipment. This is quite a big fermenter. Guys are doing bigger batches, 40 to 70 litres will be using this size, which is what we call a half BBL, around 67 litres, I think, off the top of my head. So these are the guys that have a serious home brewing, what do you call it? Addiction. Exactly. This has all the bells and whistles. So this is a commercial standard fermenter, which is actually being used by Future Magic here in Wollongabba as what we call a pilot kit system. He makes a small amount of beer, puts it in here, ferments it out, and then from there he creates his recipes on a larger scale to make it for the market. Here we have a pressure valve here, spunding valve here. We've got all the bells and whistles. Sampling valve, so you can sample your beer and get your hydrometer tests throughout it. Butterfly valves down the bottom, so we would dump our trub, which is your waste, off the bottom, and then it will give you a lot cleaner product in the long run. What are you using this one here for, Shawnee? Carbstone. So you're hitting that with gas, oxygen at the start of fermentation to get your yeast going a lot quicker. That's obviously a blow-off he's got in place. So once again, there's a racking arm that normally goes down the side here. And if you go behind that, he's got a glycol chiller. So we talked a little bit about that before. That's got a coil going down the middle, and that's cooling that to that temperature. At the moment, we've got a ginger beer in here, which is crashed to, say, 2 or 3 degrees. What that does is drops all the sediment to the bottom that we don't want. And over 2 or 3 days, we're going to discard that. And then we can transfer to keg and have beautiful, fresh beer. But that's the upper echelon. So New Era Brewing here in Brisbane brings in the SS Brewtech gear. A lot of our home brewers that are making big batches are using this type of equipment, and they've invested in it. And to tell you the truth, if you're using something like this, you're making commercial quality beer at home on a small scale. But there's no reason why you can't be making as good, or if not better, than the breweries down the road. So thanks, guys. Go get yourself a Unitank. Cheers.